builds the body, it builds the thinking process, and so many good thoughts came out. Coming from a good place, such an excellent thought. And another one was the not focusing on the outcome, but the within. And just so good, so good. And I know that, sort of like Heidi's question, we all feel, is there ever a time that we will just be good enough? I mean, that is every one of our battles, not just you, Heidi. Every one of our battles. And you know, you get to a place where there's a contentment. I am what I am, but I'm not complacent. I'm content, and I'm going to grow. I'm going to get better. But for right now, I tell you what, I'm just happy to be where I am. And there's a contentment in that. And it takes the sting of, well, they're better and they're better. Well, everybody else is better than you. Because you don't see all their stuff. You see them in church and they're at their best. So you see them in shining glory, but what about when they're all alone? You don't see that. And you know, true excellence, and I don't mean that John did such an excellent job, no pun intended, but he did such an excellent job that I don't want to add to it, but you know, when the crux of the whole thing is, what are you like when you're all alone? You can be excellent in front of people. You can put on a show. You know, I just finished a book for the second time about the agents of Babylon. It's a hard read, but I enjoy it. Books that are harder to read usually are the ones that get my interest because you dig. But I was just fascinated once again with the idea of Daniel. He was the second in command to King Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel knew the king is not what he should be. And he warned him, and he warned him in a kind way. And then the king went completely berserk and ate grass like an ox. And his hair got all tangled. And he lived out in a cave. And he was just mad. He lost his mind. And do you know that the kingdom of Babylon never found out? Even the king's closer subjects never found out that the king is missing. Because Daniel, he could have usurped the throne easily. He was second in command. And everybody listened to Daniel. They all liked him. But he protected the throne for the king. Because he knew that he would come back. Because in his prophecy he said that he will return. So Daniel held the throne and protected the king for 7 years. You didn't hear Daniel out there saying, well, yeah, I could have taken the throne, but I want to protect it for the king. No. Nobody knew. Nobody knew. The king's enemies didn't find out that the king was missing. That, to me, is excellence. Nobody knew. That is an excellent person. In the core of his being, he's excellent. And therefore, what comes out is excellent. And like me and like you and Heidi and all the rest of us, we just don't measure up. I look at Daniel and I say, I only wish I could be that. I wish I could. But you know what? I'm not Daniel. I'm Wayne. And Wayne isn't that. But Wayne is becoming that. But if I look back, I'm not that either. I am better than that. What I used to be. What I was yesterday. What I was a week ago. What I was a month ago. God is doing something new. So, I'm just blessed with that. So, before we get into the message, I have had a really busy couple weeks. It's been crazy. I have places that I feel muscles that I haven't felt in 20 years. So, we're completely redoing our showroom. It's just, I have no time for anything. But so I asked God for just give me something that doesn't take a lot of study, because I need something to just spill out, and He did. And so with that, I just want to pause. The thing with the tabernacle, I felt I rushed through it so much, so many issues that I just glazed over because of time. We had to, but the Holy of Holies, we go into the Holy of Holies. We go in through the means of worship. That is how we enter. And I want to talk about worship this morning, just on a practical level. I might touch a little bit of theology, but my point is not the theology of it. It is practical. I want a child to be able to understand this. It's not that hard. But we just have to understand and take some of the guilt away. But I'd like to hear from some of you. The whole thing of going into the Holy of Holies, did it make sense to you? Did you capture it? Can you grasp it? And if it meant something to you, and what is your battle with it? Because we're not going to take time to go through all of that. But that part was my whole focus center of the whole tabernacle. It all this other stuff led to that, and that was my zenith. And so, anybody want to just share what you got out of it, and it'll help me on this. So, anyway.
So the thing I got out of it is he started worshiping, and he didn't really know exactly when he entered in. For myself, that's at least what resonated for me, that as he was worshiping, all of a sudden he found himself in the Holy of Holies. And it was really like a threshold, just started, and then he ended up there. That's what spoke to me.
Amen. That's very good.
It was really comforting to me that you didn't make it sound like 100% 24/7 someone is in the holy place. Like that. That's where our heart is, that's where we want to be. But I find myself in different parts of that.
Yes. And that is the Christian life. You will never be in there the whole time, although you're close all the time. Anyone else? Okay, I'm not going to force anybody. But it is the whole thing about worship, because like John was mentioning, worship is what takes you in. It is by means of worship That is how you go in. And it's not like, okay, I'm going to turn the key now, and then I'm in. I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is not that way. But when you see things happen, you're in a place of worship that is an excellent, it is out of the ordinary worship. And then all of a sudden you see things happening. There's fellowship with God. Yesterday the fellowship was maybe a little, but today it's just sweet. And all of a sudden God is talking to you. You know you have crossed over. You're in. You're in that holy place. God is talking to you. You are talking to God. It's not a prayer of gimme, gimme, gimme. It's you're talking. There's fellowship. There's dialogue. And God shows you things. There's revelation. That's when the fellowship and the revelation, when those two things happen, you know you're there. And what does God show you? It could be things about yourself. It could be things about others. It could be things about the Word of God. It could be things that you had questions about for years. And all of a sudden, it just makes sense. Why did I never see that before? It just makes sense. It's so clear now. Why couldn't I see that? There was a scale on my eyes. I couldn't see that. And all of a sudden, it just makes, you're in. You're there. And the worship, knowing that you're there, the worship just becomes more and more and more and more. So, what I want to talk about is worship. How do I worship? Although I specifically used that little tagline because I don't like it. How do I worship? I think is the wrong question. And I think you'll understand when we get through this, it's not how do I worship. It's not a formula. There's something that has to happen. Worship. These are things that it lists what worship is. And these are just different of the Greek words. And all of these, in one way or another, are worship. It's the same word. And so it's not how do we worship. It's not going to church. It's not having a worship service. And in other words, the song service. It's not all of those things. Just we worship. And how do I worship? I have to lift my hands, and that's worship. And yes, body posture and all that has a lot to do with it. But that's not what it is. And I want to get us on the right focus of what worship is. And if we know what it is, this question, how do I worship, makes no sense. Because it's not how I do it. It's not a thing that I do. It's not an act of something that makes, if I do this, I'm worshiping. Although there are forms of that. So, worship is not what I do, but at the core of it, it's what I am. It's what I believe. It's what my concept is of God. It's where I place God on the priority list. It's all of these things. It's the relationship that I have with God. It's the relationship that whether minimal or huge, that relationship, it's not how I act. I act as a result of that relationship. The raising of the hands is a result of the relationship. that the raising of the hands is not necessarily worship. You can go to an AC/DC concert and they're raising their hands. That's not worship. Well, maybe it is, but not in the right way. And so, when I hold God, my perception of Him is right. I know who He is. I know what He is. I don't worship Him so I need to enter in. And so I worship Him and I just tell Him how good He is and all of this, and I'm going through these motions and I'm going through the formula, and finally I get to the point that I want, and now I want something from God. That's the formula. That's not the worship. The worship can happen instantly. And I want to give you a story, but a little bit later. Worship is a state of life. It's not an action or an experience. It's a state of being. Some actions indicate worship. Granted, it does. Like obedience. Obedience is an act of worship. But it's like my grandpa had this saying, all apples are fruits, but not all fruits are apple. So, all worship, when I have the right concept of God, well, all worship produces obedience. But not all obedience is worship.
Amen. Amen.
You can take a person and put rules around them and they will obey, but it doesn't mean they just love you and appreciate you.
Amen.
The widow's obedience in Elijah's time. Think about it. There was a drought. It hadn't rained for 3.5 years. And Elijah came along, and here's a widow and her son, and they have a little bit of flour left and a little bit of oil left, and they're going to make the loaf, and then they're going to die. And Elijah comes along and says, lady, go ahead and make that flour and oil and make a loaf, and then give it to me. Anybody that is not in worship would have said, who do you think you are? You're crazy. You're asking me to sustain you because your God isn't big enough. And you come here and tell me this, but there was something already predisposed or preset, something of an appreciation in this woman. There was already a fear of God. There was already a working of God in her heart. She recognized the voice of God. And when the prophet said, give me this, it was an act of worship. And she made the piece of bread and gave it to the prophet, and you know the story. She had plenty to eat. It never failed until it rained again. She had all that she could use. Worship is not a song service, although you are worshiping when you're singing. So it's kind of so it is a worship service, but the song service is not the worship. The worship happens before you get here. The worship happens all week long. The worship happens in your life. It's how you, it controls you. It's because God is on the throne in your life and you hold Him high. And the song service just sparks that spark plug and it comes out of you. It flows out. So it's not a song service, but we worship when we sing. It's not a church service. People say go to the worship service as in going to church. It's not that, but you are worshiping by going. So again, not all apples, all apples are fruit, but not all fruits are apples. How do I know when I'm worshiping God? Are there degrees of worship? I'm going to leave you with more questions than answers probably, but I think there are different degrees of worship. I believe that. Moses, when he went up onto the mount to get the Ten Commandments, there's fire, there's lightning, there's smoke, and the cloud comes down. That's intense worship there. Nobody down at the bottom of the hill was in that time. And Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake. He's shaking. That's worship. Now somebody will try to shake so that they have worship. It doesn't work. Peter, James, and John were on the Mount of Transfiguration. They knew they were in a place that was holy. They wanted to build an altar. It was more of an intense place. So, the formula. I'm after the formula this morning. My crosshairs are on putting a formula on worship. Years ago, many of you know Brother James, and one of the dearest brothers. Just such a gentle heart, just very kind. Love the man. He was our psalm leader, worship leader. And it's not wrong to call him worship leaders. Junior is a tremendous worship leader. But you know what? Just because Junior is leading us in the work, he can't force you to worship. You can have other things going on in your life. But for those of you that are walking with God, he leads you. He sings songs that are tremendous, and it brings worship out of him. He's a worship leader, so I'm not against that. But James was our worship leader, and we had a visiting minister come in, and I don't know if you guys know him, probably you don't, but just in case, I don't want to use his name. But I'm guessing you don't know him. But he came in to have weekend meetings. And James when he stands in front of you, there is no pretense. He's like the man that Christ found under the tree. There's no guile in this man. He has no pretense. When him and his wife had an argument on the way to church, you'd know about it. Because he'd say, I don't know why I'm here. I was a jerk to my wife this morning on the way to, and it's just, he did no pretense. He's not there pretending to be anything, but he led us in worship. And so the visiting minister was there, and so James sometimes would just, after sharing something like that, he would just start in with something soft and reverent and all of that, and and the worship just flowed. It just came easily because he set the stage. We're all failures, and we need the mercy of God, and we just so appreciate that he loves us through those failures. We so appreciate that God doesn't look at me and slap me on the face because I had an argument on the way to church with my wife, but he brings me into his presence. And it just makes you want to just love him and just call out to him. And there's just something, he leads us out. And James led us in worship, and it just flowed. Well, this preacher, this was just different than what he was used to, I guess. So he takes this verse, and you've heard it. He's not the only one. I've heard it a dozen times, and I'm sure you have too. The verse in Psalm 100. Enter into his gates with praise. I'm sorry, with thanksgiving. Enter into his gates with thanksgiving, and into his courts with praise. Be thankful to him, and bless his name. And he took this verse and publicly and he sort of corrected James. And he said, you need to come. And you need to lead us in step by step. And first you got to sing the happy song. It's thanksgiving, it's happy, it's jubilant. It makes the people want to come, and it draws them into the presence of God because, you know, they're out there fighting the world, and we start singing, and now we feel like we're in church, and then you start, after you got them there, then you go into praise. And then the praise is just the happy and glorify, and we lift you up and we exalt you. And then the worship, just soft and tender. And it just completely undid James, just cut the feet right out from under him. And he came crying. And he said, what do I do? He said, I can't lead worship like that. That's not me. What do I do? I said, well, you don't have to lead worship for the rest of this if you don't want to. But I think you should. And I think you should continue to do what you're doing right now. Who cares what the minister said? Who cares what he believes? He has no closer connection to what God thinks than you do. He may be wrong, you may be wrong, I may be wrong, we all may be wrong. I think you should just keep doing what you're doing and let it run off like water on a duck's back. But I know that's hard. It's easy for me to say, and I know that's hard to do. So you don't have to if you don't want to. And he said, actually, I want to. Because he said, that can destroy me if I let it. And he went ahead. And he went up and he said something. He said, you know, I went through a hard time. Just last night I went through a hard time, and I just, you know, I'm struggling with some things. And he left no indication what he's struggling with, but just, my heart is just staged right now to just let God be God. And he just started singing those songs, and off it went. Worship was instant. And I give that illustration not only because that's how many churches operate with a formula, but that's how we tend to operate. We have formulas. We say, if I do this, well, last time I was doing this, and I was doing this, and all of a sudden I found myself here, and things were happening. No, it's not going to happen that way the next time. You don't have to come in this way. You know, first of all, I think that's taking this verse completely wrong. Basically, it means don't come into church with a sour face. Be happy when you go to church. Yes, I understand there's deeper meanings here than that, but that is the face value of this. It's not some formula that you have to follow, because I'll tell you what, I walked in here this morning, worship on my mind, and the worship team was up here practicing, and they were singing that song that we just sang, Something New, and that I just walked in, and there was instant worship. I didn't have to go through this formula. It just, boom, there it was. And I was just identifying with God immediately, and it drew it out of me. Yes, Lord, yes, yes, yes. It didn't take 2 minutes of happy songs to warm me up. And I'm not against happy songs. I like happy songs. So don't be afraid to play those, Junior. I'm not bashing those. I like happy songs. I like praise. But you know something? Praise, even if you get to the real truth of the matter, praise is an outworking of worship. Worship is a way of life. It is a state of being. It is not an event. I the leper in Matthew 8 got the memo. And then a leper came and worshipped him. Just boom, right off the bat. He didn't have to go through the happy song. And he didn't have to go through the praise song. And then finally get to the worship. Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. Instantaneous he came, because he had already established in his mind who this is. He already put him in his proper place. This is the healer. This is the King of Kings. This is the Lord of Lords. This is God. This is God in the flesh. And if he's willing, I will be clean. He had done all the work. He didn't come and have to get pumped up. He came worshiping, and he said, Lord, if you are willing. And Jesus reached out his hand and touched him, saying, I will. I want to. Lord, if you want to, you can make me clean. And Jesus said, I want to. I want to. The Gentile woman. There was a woman of Canaan. She was a Greek. Came out of the same regions and cried out to him, saying, have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely possessed by a demon. I'm surprised she even knew about that, but she did. But Jesus didn't answer a word. And his disciples came and begged Jesus, saying, send her away. She's just crying out after her. She's making a nuisance of herself. Just send her away. And then listen to what Jesus said. I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I wasn't sent to them. How would you respond if you had a need and you went to God in prayer with it and you heard God say, I wasn't sent to you. I wasn't sent for you. I was sent for these people. I wasn't sent to you. What would happen in your spirit? What would go on? I know what I would do. I would be one of the weakest ones. Well then, okay. But this woman had something amazing. The worship was so deeply established in this woman. God, Christ was amazing. I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then she came and she worshiped. By the way, she forgot the happy song too, but she came and worshiped, saying, can you hear this? I don't know if she went on her knee or what. Oh, help me! Help me! There was some sort of bodily gesture that indicated worship. I remember a preacher saying, "Help is a good prayer." It is. Didn't need no happy song to get that one out either. God, you are God. So, but he answered. After he told her he wasn't sent to her, he said, "Lady, it's not fair to take the children's bread and throw it to you dogs." After Jesus, John, you come to Jesus with something, and Jesus said, "John, I didn't come for you. I came for Mike, but not. I didn't come." And then you get on your knees, "Help me." And he said, "It's not fair to take what I intended for Mike and give it to you. It's not fair." would you do? I think I would turn tail and run. But this woman had amazing something going on. She said, yes, Lord, yet even those nasty dogs that you refer to me as eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. And Jesus said, woman, great is your faith. This is amazing. And it wasn't great in quantity. It was great in tenacity. It was great in diligence. I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up. Lord, you said you weren't sent for me. It's okay, but help me. Well, it's not fair that I should take somebody else's gift and give it to you. I know, but even the crumbs that fall off of the table are all that I need, and my daughter will eat. He said, woman, that is amazing. And he answered her cry and healed her little girl. I marvel at that story. And incidentally, this is a sidebar, and I don't have time for that, but at verse 26, it is not fair to take the children's bread. What was she asking for? A demon to be thrown out. Jesus said right here, that is the children's bread. That is your right. I don't have time to go into that. That's a whole other message. But you have been given that right as a child of God. That is your bread. You can eat that bread. You can cast out that devils. I'll get it right. You can cast out devils. It is your bread. You can take it. God has given it to you. But that's a totally different message. So, worship carries a thought of surrender, a willingness to allow Him to be God. Willingness to say that God is God. I don't have to have the answer. I don't need a formula. Down deep inside of me, in the depth of my soul, way down in the bosom of my being, I know that He's kind. I know that He's loving. I know that He is infinite in whatever He is, so that kindness is infinite, that love is infinite, that mercy is infinite, that justice is infinite, His goodness is infinite, His grace is infinite. You can go on for a day probably, and He's worthy of praise. All those things have been pre-established in my heart. I don't need another session of some kind of songs leading me up to where I finally acknowledge that. I'm there. And so are you. So are you. Or you wouldn't be here this morning. You've already established He's worthy. And incidentally, if you want some entertainment, worthy, the English word was originally worthship. And you should read some articles on the internet of people that are so totally offended by it. They say, well, yes, He has made us worthy, but so what? And I'm like, somebody go help that brother. He's so myopic that he doesn't see that the worship is Christ, not Him. My goodness. You shouldn't have any access to a computer keyboard if that's what you believe. But anyway, He's worthy. When you consider Him worthy and you do a study, and I don't want to go through that. This is to be practical. When you know He's worthy, it's a state of being. And when you're in that state of being, a happy song comes on and you immediately join in because it comes out of the worship. And you enjoy the happy song. It's not that it's wrong. You enjoy the happy song. And then a praise comes in. You are glorious. You are mighty. You are king. And you pump your fist. Yes! That comes out of worship. But worship precedes all of that by a lifetime. By a whole being. By all of your struggles of the past. All mingled together and formed into a shape that your opinion of God is this. He's high. He's holy. He's lifted up. And his train fills the temple. And I come to this God like this woman. I come to him knowing that he's God. And I know that I don't deserve it. But I also know that because of him, I have been given this thing that I want. I have already been given it. So I'm coming to ask. And the worship precedes all of that. We don't finally work ourselves into a worship. And that takes me to the next. Oh, well, this is the demoniac that came running and he kneeled before him. The King James says worship. Because, again, it's position. So, John, and this is Jesus talking to the Samaritan woman. You know the story of the Samaritans. They're half-breeds and they were despised by Jews, and you know the story. Yet the hour is coming and is now here because I'm here. Jesus is the change of this. The kingdom is now here. The kingdom is present. So the hour is coming and it's now here. When the true worshipers, not the things that we've watched in the temple, not you coming with your sacrifice, and yet you're wondering, well, wonder if the Browns are winning. But here's my sacrifice, Levi. What can you do with it? What's the score? Not that. And I'm sorry, you sports fans. Yet the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Get a hold of that. For the Father seeks that kind of person to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. So now let's just take a look at this. What part of me worships? My mouth can sing praises, but my mouth doesn't actually worship. That's an attitude. That's a state of being. The praise is a result of my worship inside. The worship that I hold him in this place. So my spirit, the place where God lives, in my spirit resonates with the Almighty, and my spirit worships. You know, I have a picture here. Let's read this again, and I want to go to that picture. Yet the hour is coming, and now is here, when the true worshipers, away from the temple type worship, the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeks such as that to worship him. God is spirit. So therefore, those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. That girl, I have no idea who she is. I got her off the internet. Hopefully I'm not in copyright violation. But is she worshiping, or does she have a headache? Got a stress headache. What do you think? The body language says worship. And probably is because I found that under worship, so probably is. But, so the body language says worship. But that doesn't mean that's worship. It may well be, because worship does look like that. But she may be having a pain in the back of her neck. She may just be so hungry she's yearning for some mashed potatoes. Just the body language in itself is not worship. That was the temple. That was the temple. Now, Jesus tells this Samaritan woman, this God, He wants you to worship in spirit. The whole inside of you reaches out to Him, and there's no pretense. That body language describes what my body, my soul, my spirit feels. Oh, God, you're so worthy. That is spirit and truth. That is the way I worship Him. When my body and my spirit align, and they say the same thing, and there's no pretense, and I'm not putting something on because I want somebody to see me worship. I want them to know I'm holy. No, this is true. This is the spirit and the body aligned. It's spirit and truth. So, they even worship, or they will worship the Antichrist. You can worship the wrong thing. You can worship the creature more than the Creator. You can worship the wrong things. It's an act of where you place it. It's an act of so I talked about obedience. Worship has obedience with it. So when something wrong demands your obedience, that is in a sense worship to that thing. And it's not always wrong. I mean, you obey your boss. You obey your parents. It doesn't mean you worship your parents, but that is a form of worship. But when we highly esteem God and let everything about us, whether it likes it or not, just says amen to God. Just amen. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord is a statement of submission to His will. And worship, Abraham said, the lad and I are going to go over and we're going to worship. We're just going to do whatever God says to do. It's worship. So, we sing songs of praise because we worship Him. The songs of praise does not lead us into worship. The song of praise is a result of worship in us already. And our hearts are surrendered to Him. We have no argument with His authority. We have no issue. Well, God says this, but I just can't. I don't like that. I just can't. I've talked to those people, and you want to help them, but there's only so much you can do. We know He is worthy of all power. He's worthy of all praise. He's worthy of all honor. He's worthy of all wisdom and all glory and all might and all. I mean, if there were a billion worlds, He would be worth the worship of all billion worlds in uniform worship to Him. He's worth all of it. He's worthy of all of it. And we know who He is. He's kind, He's loving, and all of those attributes. And we've already placed Him with those things in our mind. We already know who He is. We can depend on, and Miriam was talking about it this morning, that she just comes to God and she asks for the oil, the healing. We know He's the healer. We know He's that. And we don't, like in John's discussion, we all felt like we just don't measure up to perfection. We don't. But when our hearts are pure, when our heart, then God is satisfied with me where I'm at. That chokes a lot of people. But God is satisfied with where I'm at. He's not spanking me because I'm not a little bit further. Here's where you are. Here's where you are. Here's where I'm taking you. He's not going, well, you should have done better. Come on. You don't hear that. So, worship takes you in. Worship is the means that we have of entering into His presence in a real way, into the Holy of Holies. We, like in the tabernacle, the worship is the altar of incense, and there's a sweet-smelling savor on there. And it's just that worship takes us in. And soon we find there's things happening. I'm just talking with God. I'm just fellowshipping with God. It's just like, you can just talk your heart out to God, and He doesn't scold you for it. God, I'll be honest with you. I've had some pretty harsh discussions with God, like when some certain young man came around wanting to date my oldest daughter. I had harsh discussions with God. And I said, who does this guy think he is? I resent him. And I did. I resent him coming in here. A cowboy, and he's going to lasso this girl. He made no investment in this girl. He knows nothing about her. Yet he wants to take her away and do his own thing. God, I don't like this. And I know my attitude is wrong. I know it. But this is where I am, and I don't like it a bit. But God, I want you to change. I want you to change. And then He did. And I love my son-in-law. He's a very good son-in-law. When you can talk to God the way you are, there's an openness that's fellowship. Because if Mike and I would sit down and discuss, and we have to protect what I say, he might get offended, and he protects what he says because I might get offended, and it's just not real, and I better not make a joke he thinks I'm saying it about him. That's not fellowship. I may be talking, but that's not fellowship. But when we just get together and we're just who we are, and I can make a joke, and he laughs, he's not offended, he doesn't think I'm stabbing him in the back somehow. And I can just be who I am. I can just tell him where I'm struggling. And I have no fear of what he's going to do with that. He's going to go out and make some big story. Fellowship is there. That's how we know that we're in fellowship with God. It's no longer put on. It just happens. Fellowship is a wonderful, wonderful thing. We're going to have it in heaven. We're going to sit down at a supper. The marriage supper of life. Something that boggles my mind still. Why would Jesus be the one to serve us? He should be sitting at the head of the table. But he's just what he has always been. He will come and serve. That's what he did to the disciples. They had dirty feet. He shouldn't have been the one to wash the feet, but he did because he just serves. You want to be the greatest? Be the greatest servant. And that's the way fellowship works. Fellowship is such a wonderful thing. And that fellowship is a result of worship. Fellowship does not create worship. Worship creates fellowship. And worship creates revelation. And all of a sudden, God tells you things. Scriptures open up. I remember one time I was battling with a certain scripture. Just battling. And I had the rest of the message worked out. That was up in PA. I had the rest of the message worked out. And I remember sitting along the wall, about where Jefferson is sitting probably, somewhere in there. And I was just, it was early in the morning, Sunday morning, and I just sat there still battling. And God, I can't get this. It's just, and all alone, there's nobody within, hearing distance. I'm just there all alone. And all of a sudden, I just heard it so clearly. I actually looked around, although I knew it wasn't audible. It may as well have been audible. The verse, and I just, that doesn't even make sense. I just opened my Bible, went to that verse, and there it was. It was so clear. How could he do that? It was just, that just was the icing on the cake. Why didn't I see that? But revelation. Worship. If you get revelation outside of worship, be very suspect of that. Very suspect. But worship is a state of being. You don't enter into worship. You live there. It's a life. It's a state again. It's what I am, what my past 20, 30, 40 years all work together, and how I esteem Christ, God, the Holy Spirit, how I esteem them. That is worship. And there's so much that could be said on a theological level, but I want this to be where we live, practically. And that is where we live. How we esteem God. That's the worship in our heart. And when we hear, we just need the tiniest little spark. It won't take much. I walk in, and they're singing, He's doing a new thing. And turning the water into wine, whatever it was, I don't remember. But it just instantly, it was on. It was worship. Because it was already there. The formula, that's what I'm after. We develop formulas. Religion in me and in you develop formulas. This is how to worship. When we do this and we do this, then that is worship. Well, that may be that lady standing there going like that, but it's not worship in spirit and truth. It may be some sort of, I want to be, obedient now. And people can come to church like that. And they can have a form of worship. They can be raising their hands and thinking, I hope that guy notices me over there. I'd like to go on a date with him. And the guy's over here thinking, how can I get to know her? It's not worship. That's not spirit and truth. It's I am in His presence all the time. And now I'm just so much more there. The worship leader is taking me even more and higher. And I love the presence. I love the fellowship. I love it all. So, anyway, I hope that helps. It's just a thing of there's something in humans that we think if it worked once and that's how we got there, then that's the formula. And it's not. I'm against that formula. I don't like the premise of that formula. That how to worship, that's the wrong question. If you have worship in you, it's not how. It's you just do. It'll look different for you than it does for him or for me. But it's worship. Worship for you may be sitting on the couch crying, and for this guy over here, it's jumping up and down and shouting. It doesn't matter. It's worship.